I think what appealed to me about the script of House of Boys was the fact that it was a story that we don't hear anymore. It's a story about the early days of AIDS, when it really was AIDS, when HIV had not been discovered as the virus responsible, when it was a death sentence. And it tells the story from a European point of view. There have been American films and plays and all kinds of literature about those early days of the epidemic, but it's rather wonderful to read a script about it in Europe. It's also a love story, a very touching love story. It's about youth, it's about escape, it's about fantasy, it's about togetherness and all the things that a good love story should be about. And stalking behind it is this terrible shadow of AIDS, which for me, for my generation, was absolutely enormous thing. I left university in 1981 just as the vague first rumours began to appear about this so-called gay plague, and so reading the script brought back all kinds of memories. It brought back all the bedsides of people I visited who died so quickly in the early years of the epidemic. It's very touching, very moving, but I think it's rather wonderful because it's not too grim a film. Somehow it is a very hopeful film because it's about love. One of the really interesting things about the early days of AIDS was that a whole group of doctors, mostly virologists and immunologists, the virologists often were people who were expected to look at unusual diseases, sometimes tropical diseases and so on. They were the ones who were given the job of dealing with the patients who were going to die, and for running the wards. And a new kind of doctoring emerged. It was a doctoring of sympathy, because the problems that these doctors faced were that they had dying men, young men usually, certainly usually between the ages of 18 and 40, a lot of them. And these men often had partners, male same-sex partners, which now we take for granted, but at the time was still something, there was no structure for the dealing with it. It's not the same as a wife, or it wasn't regarded as the same as a wife. But also these young men had parents, and sometimes the parents, the first news that a couple would have that their child was gay was that their child had a disease that was going to kill them. So it was a terrible thing. And then they had to meet the other man, the man that this person lived with, and they would naturally think, did that man give my child this disease? You know, there was this terrible tension, and the doctors were in the middle of it. On the one hand, they were trying to deal with this mysterious and terrifying new disease, and on the other hand, they were having to discover all kinds of what I suppose would be called people skills, the ability to relate. And there were an enormous number of doctors, and I've met many of them, who became incredibly close friends with the dying and the dying's partners and the parents, and they often had to bring them together to make the parents like the partner and the partner like the parents, and for them all to get on, and for them all to, you know, to subdue their feelings of mistrust for the sake of the dying one. And anyway, my character, Dr. Marsh, Trevor Marsh, is just that kind of a doctor. He's someone who would never have expected to face this kind of problem in his doctoring. He's a virologist, immunologist, someone who specializes in unusual diseases. And the most unusual disease to have crossed his path comes in the form of what we now call AIDS, HIV/AIDS. And he has to discover this empathy, which he's very good at. He's a nice character. He's a likable character because he's very warm and kind. And I like playing characters like that, though I like playing villains as well. Yes, I had many friends who died of AIDS, and I've always had a strong connection with AIDS charities in Britain. I'm in charge of the fundraising department of the largest AIDS charity in Europe, in fact, the Terence Higgins Trust. And for 20 years now, I've hosted the annual gala party for raising money and so on. And I've been connected with that since really the beginning of the epidemic. And I've had some of my closest friends have died, and some have survived and are still clinging on, I'm glad to say. And a year and a half ago, I made two one-hour documentary films about HIV/AIDS for the BBC. So I've always had this strong kind of feeling that it's a subject that should be talked about and addressed, because I always think it's a bit like mushrooms, you know. Mushrooms thrive in the dark, and I think HIV thrives in the dark. When we stop talking about it, that's when it becomes most dangerous. So I mean, it doesn't mean I would automatically do any film just because it's about AIDS. That would be weird. But the reason I accepted this film is because I think who knows? There are very complicated things that go through your head. It's partly, I think, it's a gut feeling. It's a bit like why you choose a dish in a restaurant, you know, it's a feeling. It's not logical necessarily. It's something to do with your heart rather than your head. And I just felt these were good people who were doing it. And I knew Lake, who plays Frank, and I just thought it was a good thing to do. And it's a small part. It's not a huge commitment on my part. And nonetheless, it's a role I wanted to do. And so I'm happy to have done it. It's the first time I made a film in Luxembourg, and I've enjoyed myself. The atmosphere is very good on set, the morale is very good. It's wonderful to hear all these languages being spoken. It's an English language film. The crew speak French and German and Dutch and whatever weird language Luxembourger is, Luxembourgeois, a strange hybrid mixture of them all. And there's a great feeling of international cooperation going on. It's a great place to film. I filmed in Holland before, and in France, and in Italy, and in Spain, in many European countries, but never in Luxembourg. So it's nice to be able to tick the Luxembourg box. I hope that young people see this film. I hope people the same age as Ben and Lake, who play the two protagonists, see it, because Ben and Lake obviously have done a lot of research in playing the characters they play, but you know, they weren't born when AIDS first arrived in this world. And there are generations now of young people who don't really know quite how terrifying AIDS was and how terrifying it still is. Although there are treatments now, the triple combination therapy is reduced to one daily pill from the dozens and dozens that people used to take in the 90s. But nonetheless, a virus like HIV can morph, can change. Who knows? I do think the original message of, you know, safe sex is still a really important one. And I think also, you know, there is a lot of freedom that young people now enjoy, gay young people and straight young people enjoy, because of the, if you like, the suffering that was undergone in the 1980s, because of the change in attitudes that took place towards juvenile sexuality and the rights of young people to enjoy their bodies as they choose, but with responsibility, and the whole issue. I don't want to get all over serious about it, but I do hope young people get something out of this film, and that they pay tribute to those who've gone before.